Welcome to The Night Visitors, where we share purportedly true accounts of interactions with vampires and other supernatural predators. I'm James, a paranormal researcher and lifelong vampire enthusiast, coming to you from Transylvania. Today, I'd like to share a chilling little story that allegedly occurred in Texas over a 3-week period in the autumn of 1977. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of people involved. I heard this account from a classmate while attending the University of Massachusetts in the early 2000s, who had heard it from his grandmother, who experienced the events firsthand. Following the fall of Saigon in 1975, Bihn fled South Vietnam with her son and daughter-in-law and found herself living in a tiny apartment in Texas. She could not speak English well and found it difficult to integrate into society. Her son and his wife worked long hours, often overnight shifts, and Bihn stayed alone in the apartment. Her days were very tedious and boring, and the nights were even worse. She spent most of her time watching sitcoms and movies, the plot and humor of which she didn't fully grasp. Perhaps because she had too much time on her hands, Bihn paid close attention to the coming and goings of the neighbors. There was something that troubled her about the apartment across the hall. The man that occupied it was young and quite handsome. Bihn observed him through the peephole in the door and listened to him speak with guests that would come calling at all hours. He was clearly Vietnamese, like most of the building's residents, but he carried himself differently, almost with a degree of aristocratic haughtiness, and he spoke their language quite elegantly, as if he were a poet educated in another time. One thing bothered Bihn about her eccentric neighbor. She only ever saw him at night. During the day, the apartment was deathly silent. But starting after sundown, young, stylishly dressed people would constantly come and go from his apartment. Bihn would watch them from the other side of her apartment door. They would enter and stay for a half hour or so and leave smiling and in a dazed state, and on more than one occasion she noticed that his guests would have bruises and 2 telltale puncture wounds on their necks and wrists. Bihn knew her handsome, nocturnal neighbor was a vampire. He wasn't the traditional macazong of Vietnamese folklore, who are regular people by day that by night fly about the countryside with their toes in their nostrils, stopping at homes to drink the blood of the living, especially that of women who have recently given birth. He definitely wasn't like that. He was charming and seductive, but no less a creature of the night. One evening, Bihn returned later than usual from a trip to the vegetable market, and walking down the hall towards her apartment, she found herself face to face with the vampire neighbor. He smiled warmly and bowed his head in a reverent gesture of courtesy. His lips, deep red in color, parted when he smiled to reveal 2 razor-sharp canine teeth. Bihn felt a chill invade her body. She was taken aback when the young man greeted her in French. Bonsoir, madame. Enchanté de faire votre connaissance. J'espère que nous nous reverrons souvent. Good evening, madam. I'm happy to make your acquaintance. I hope we will see each other often. His use of the French language was oddly out of place, as it was a language tied to the colonial period in Indochina and was not commonly spoken among people of his age, and much less in this Texas apartment complex. Bihn feigned a smile and greeted him as kindly as she could manage in Vietnamese, but she hoped silently to herself that she would never see him again. From that night forward, Bihn was filled with fear. Images of her nightly neighbor haunted her dreams, and she found herself staying awake by night just to fend off any attack should the vampire next door decide to pay her a visit. She knew the old beliefs and superstitions from her homeland and tried every method she could to keep the vampire at bay. She burned spirit money to her ancestors, invoking their help and protection, and she even left plates of tiet canh, a traditional Vietnamese blood pudding, outside her bedroom window. Bihn made it herself with fresh pig's blood from the local butcher, and she secretly laced it with herbs that the mountain folk of northern Vietnam used to ward off the undead. She didn't know if it worked, but each morning the plate was always empty and licked clean. She didn't know if it was a wild animal or her vampire neighbor that was eating the tiet canh. Almost a month had passed since Bihn had begun to suspect that the young man across the hall was a child of the night. She truly questioned her sanity and was embarrassed for believing such superstitious nonsense. One day, she stepped into the hallway to find that the door to the young man's apartment had been left open. Propelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, Bihn crept into the apartment determined to see what she could find out about her mysterious neighbor. The place was littered with old black and white photographs from the era of French Indochina. She found posters from a Saigon theater dating to the 1920s, advertising plays in French and Vietnamese. She examined the playbills carefully and saw that one of the young men in the cast eerily resembled the man who had become the object of her obsession. Then she saw him. The vampire was lying on a bed in a room off to the side of the living room. It was high noon, but the room had heavy brown velvet drapes drawn across the windows that blocked out the sun. He lay there motionless, as if in a catatonic state. His eyes were open and staring directly at the ceiling. If he was breathing, Bihn could not detect it. She turned and fled the apartment and ran from the building and didn't come home until several hours later when she knew she would not be alone. Bihn continued to leave tiet canh outside of her window each night and prayed for protection. She even got holy water from a local church and sprinkled it around her apartment and in front of the neighbor's door and hoped with all her strength that he would go away and never return. One morning, Bihn stepped into the hallway to see the building administrator showing the neighbor's apartment to a family of prospective renters. She looked into the apartment and saw that it was completely empty. She did not remember hearing anyone moving boxes or furniture from the apartment, but it was completely bare with no signs of anyone having lived there. Bihn approached the administrator and gently touched her hand and asked her in precarious English, "Did the young man who was staying here move out?" The administrator gave her a puzzled look and responded, "This unit hasn't been occupied in over a year." Bihn shrugged and went back into her apartment. A few months later, Bihn moved with her son and daughter-in-law to a new house they had bought on the outskirts of Austin. She rarely spoke of what happened over those weeks in the autumn of 1977 out of fear of ridicule and judgment, but she always maintained a strong belief in the supernatural and in the existence of vampires. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's episode. If you happen to be viewing this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. If you would like to share your personal encounter with the undead, contact me at thenightvisitorsvrs@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. You can find The Night Visitors on your favorite podcast platform as well as YouTube, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter where you will receive each week's episode directly in your inbox, as well as articles on vampire lore and vampires in popular culture. A special thanks to composer Tim Kulig for our intro music, Haunted House.